Today we are going to read Swan Lake, which is a story adapted from the ballet by Pamela Kennedy, illustrated by Russ Flint. And I have to say, this was always one of my favorites when I was little, because I loved ballet, but also this book in particular, the illustrations are really, really pretty. So I'll try and take some time to show those to you and give you some time to look at them, because I've always loved looking at them. So here we go. Swan Lake, adapted from the ballet by Pamela Kennedy, illustrated by Russ Flint. Once upon a time, in a land far beyond the sunset, there lived a widowed queen and her only son, Prince Siegfried. See all the colors? So pretty. The queen dearly loved her son, but she worried because he was not married. So on the day before Siegfried's 21st birthday, the queen called him to her chambers and told him it was time for him to find a bride, a future queen. There's Prince Siegfried, and there's his mom. But there is no one I love, Siegfried complained. Then, said the queen, we shall arrange a great birthday ball and invite all the loveliest princesses from near and far. You may choose the one who pleases you most, and if she agrees, you will be wed. Prince Siegfried's shoulders drooped, his smile faded, the joyous sparkle left his eyes, and he turned to go. Seeing her son's disappointment, the queen suggested, why not go for a hunt? It will take your mind off your troubles. He doesn't look very happy. I like her. She looks really nice. A little twinkle in her eyes. So, leaving his mother, the prince quickly gathered his bow and arrows, called for his favorite hunting companions, and prepared his fastest horse. Then they rode off across the countryside. As he rode, Siegfried tried to forget that the next evening he would be forced to find a bride, even one he did not love. All day long the hunters searched for game, but they found none. Tired and discouraged, they turned back toward the palace just as the sun began to set. At that moment, Siegfried heard a whirring sound. Straining to see in the twilight, he gasped with disbelief as he watched a flock of rare wild swans racing across the sky. Leading the flock was a graceful swan, larger than the others, and on its head Siegfried glimpsed the shimmer of a golden crown. As if drawn by some magical spell, the prince wheeled his startled horse around and dashed back into the thick forest, chasing after the mysterious swan. The other young men tried to follow, but soon were hopelessly lost in the tangled forest. Look at that swan with a crown. See that? Goodness. Siegfried led his horse through the deep green woods until the trees parted and he found himself beside a shimmering silver lake. Rising upward like a giant fortress by the water's edge stood a stone tower. It was covered with moss and twining vines, and a cold and forbidding mist clung to its walls. Siegfried shivered. Then, turning, he caught his breath. For there, gliding on the still lake, was the flock of wild swans. The young prince drew his crossbow and took aim at the golden crowned swan. But as he prepared to shoot, his eyes clouded with tears. He dropped his bow. Never had he seen such beauty. If only, he thought sadly, I could find a maiden as lovely as this swan, then surely I would want to marry. When Siegfried raised his eyes once more, the beautiful swan had disappeared. But coming toward him out of the mists was the loveliest maiden he had ever seen. Her golden hair tumbled about her shoulders like a glistening cloud. Her eyes shone in the moonlight, and her fair skin glowed with the beauty of a rose petal. Her gown of purest white billowed about her in the evening breeze, and a circlet of gold crowned her head. Siegfried gazed upon her in wonder, afraid that his very voice might cause her to disappear. "What is your name?" he whispered at last. "I am Odette," the beautiful maiden replied, and her voice was as soft as moonlight on the lake. "I am the Swan Queen," the girl continued sadly. "Many years ago, an evil magician named Redbeard stole me from my parents and cast a spell upon me and several other maidens. He turned us into wild swans. All day we must fly or hide to keep from being killed by hunters. Then each night, from midnight until dawn, we are allowed to become maidens again. But with the rising of the sun, Redbeard's spell grips us as we turn again into swans." A silvery tear slipped from the corner of the young girl's eye, and Siegfried, moved with love, reached to embrace her. As he did so, there was a terrible screeching and a flapping of wings. A gigantic owl swooped over the pair and stirred the waters of the lake like a storm. "It's Redbeard," gasped Odette, and Siegfried felt her tremble with fear. "Is there no way to break the spell?" the prince asked. "There is only one way," Odette replied. "Someone must promise to love me forever and must ask me to be his bride. Only then will the evil spell be broken." Siegfried's heart filled with hope. "Then I will be that one," he declared. "Do not speak so quickly," Odette warned, "for Redbeard is crafty and his power is great." "Tomorrow night there is to be a ball at the palace," Siegfried cried excitedly. "Come, and I will pledge my love to you before everyone there." As he spoke, the first light of dawn crept across the eastern sky, and Odette began to disappear into the mist around the lake. Siegfried strained to hear her reply, but caught only the sound of swans' wings in the morning breezes. Racing back to the palace, Siegfried excitedly planned his announcement he would make at his birthday ball. All day long, the palace was bustling with preparations for the ball. The cooks baked cakes and iced desserts. The maids and butlers swept and polished until everything in the palace gleamed. The grooms brushed the royal horses and braided their tails and manes with brightly colored ribbons. The jester practiced his silliest tricks, and the chamberlain ran about in a frenzy trying to keep track of all the arrangements. All was in order when the clock struck 8 and the guests began to arrive. Beautiful maidens from across the kingdom arrived with their fathers or uncles. One by one they were brought before the prince and queen, but though they were lovely, Siegfried shook his head at each. His thoughts were only of Odette, and he kept hoping to see her enter the ballroom. Suddenly there was a blare of trumpets. The ballroom doors swung open, and there on the steps stood a magnificent couple. The man was taller than anyone else in the room. He wore a suit of deepest black, and his hair and beard were a fiery reddish gold. Beside him stood a slender maiden, also dressed in velvety black. Her beauty outshone all others in the room, and Siegfried's heart leaped with pure joy. Surely his Odette had come. He rushed to her side and swept her onto the dance floor. As they twirled and glided to the music, Siegfried was bewitched by the maiden's beauty. He did not see the evil grin on the face of the maiden's father, for Redbeard had transformed his own daughter, Odile, into the likeness of Odette, the Swan Queen. If he could trick Siegfried into promising his love to Odile, then Odette would forever remain a swan under Redbeard's curse. Odette, fearing just such trickery, had flown to the palace. Since it was before midnight, however, she could not take on human form. Watching through the palace windows, she saw Prince Siegfried dancing in the arms of Redbeard's daughter. She knew she would be doomed if Siegfried pledged his love to Odile. Wildly, Odette beat her wings against the windows, trying to warn the prince. But Siegfried was so enchanted with Odile, he did not see the Swan Queen struggle. When the music stopped, Siegfried brought the beautiful maiden to his mother. There, before the assembled guests, he declared, "This is my beloved. I have chosen her to be my bride." Suddenly there was a crash of thunder and the blinding flash of lightning. The palace window shattered, and Siegfried gasped to see the figure of the Swan Queen turn and sweep into the darkness. Redbeard's laughter filled the ballroom, and he and his daughter disappeared in the sweep of his billowing black cape. In an instant, Siegfried knew he had been tricked. Frantically, he dashed from the ballroom. Jumping upon the fastest horse in the stables, he raced off toward the forest. The horse's hooves flashed in the moonlight and thundered across the hills and through the murky woodlands. Bursting through the tangled undergrowth, Siegfried finally spied the lake and the stony fortress. He leaped from his horse, calling for Odette and stumbling blindly through the misty darkness. At last, he saw a group of maidens dressed in white. They were gathered around another maiden who lay weeping on the cold ground. It was Odette. Swiftly, Siegfried ran to her and gently lifted her to her feet. "How could you have broken your promise?" the sobbing maiden cried. "Oh, my Odette," Siegfried replied with anguish. "I thought it was you with whom I danced. I believed it was you I held. Redbeard had bewitched me. Can you ever forgive me? Is there nothing we can do?" "I forgive you, my Siegfried, but there is nothing we can do now to break the spell. I am doomed to be a swan forever." "No, it cannot be!" Siegfried's cry of anger and grief shattered the stillness of the night. Mysteriously, the lake waters began to churn and foam. There was a flapping and whipping of the air, and a huge owl appeared atop the stone fortress. With a terrible screech, it was upon the prince, tearing at him with his sharp talons. Siegfried was no match for the magician, but his love for Odette gave him strength. In the howling wind, the young prince and the old magician struggled. Back and forth they fought, until, with his last bit of energy, Siegfried tore the wings from the thrashing bird. His power gone, the evil Redbeard lay beside the lake, beaten at last. Weak from his efforts, the wounded prince stumbled to where Odette lay beside the stone fortress. Her maiden stood beside her with tear-filled eyes. Odette was as still as the stones and as pale and as white as the moonlight. Kneeling beside her, Siegfried lifted the death still Swan Queen. As he did so, a tear fell from his eyes onto her cheek. Slowly, a faint warmth filled her body, and a pale pink color rose to her skin. Odette stirred, and her eyes fluttered open. As she looked upon the handsome prince, she sighed with peace. "Oh, Siegfried," she whispered, "you have released us from the power of Redbeard's curse." Siegfried's heart nearly burst with love for the beautiful maiden he held. "And now, my precious Odette, nothing will ever separate us again." Together, they faced the stillness of the lake and watched as the first rays of dawn shimmered in the east. So that one was a little bit different than what we usually do, but I hope you liked it. I hope you really liked the pictures too, because like I said, those are my favorite. Bye.